All right, so we are at the top of the hour here. So we are going to go ahead and get started with our 1099 overview with SAP Business by Design. Thank you so much for joining, everybody. We appreciate your time in conducting this session. We're very excited about this webinar, given the season, and so we're excited to have you all join and go through this overview with you. So we're going to go ahead and introduce our SAP Business by Design team on the next slide here. So our leadership team here for the SAP Business by Design practice here at Phoenix Business Consulting. We don't have everyone listed here on the call today, but we do have two of us so far. So our practice director, David Snyder, Carol Casey is going to be leading our session here today. She's our finance lead, solution architect for SAP Business by Design. Many years in the business, so very excited to have her lead this session. Asif Raj, our director of development, and myself, manager of projects and accounts here for the Business by Design team. So again, you can reach out to any of us at any time if you have any questions, and we'd love to work with you on 1099s and all things Business by Design. So thank you again for joining us, and we're excited to conduct this session. And we want to give a little background on our company here as well. So who is Phoenix Business Consulting? We are a global enterprise, 25 plus years in the SAP consulting ecosystem, headquarters in Sarasota, Florida, but are a global company with 4 main offices in 7 countries and 250 plus employees. And Phoenix Business Consulting has helped to develop SAP best practices as well. And so we are a full spectrum partner. And so listed ahead will be some of the products we work with as well. As I mentioned, full spectrum SAP partner. Here are some of the products that we work with. We cover SAP Business by Design, which is what our 1099 session here today will be primarily focused on. And then we do work with SAP S/4HANA, SuccessFactors, Analytics Cloud, Ariba, and Concur. And a little more visual on our product line here on the next slide as well. So Signavio, Analytics Cloud, S/4HANA Cloud are only some of the products that we have helped SAP create best practices on, and we perform consulting on as well. Now, before we start, we want to go over just a few of the housekeeping items for our webinar. Now, you'll receive a link of today's presentation and a copy of the PowerPoint. So you don't need to take notes. You can stay fully focused on when Carol goes through the session here in the system. You can put your questions in the QA section of the webinar. There's a chat bar there. Feel free to log your questions in there live during the webinar, and we'll try to get answers either live during the session, or we can push them to the end of the session, just kind of depending on the flow of the webinar here with Carol. So feel free to enter those questions there in the chat box. If we don't get to all the questions, we're happy to continue the discussion after the call as well. Again, you can feel free to contact any of us listed there on the PowerPoint as well at any time. We're happy to book follow-up sessions. And you'll receive a link to register for our future webinars as well. We're covering 1099s today, given the season, but we will be having these webinars quite frequently moving forward into 2025 as well. So excited for you all to possibly join those sessions as well as we move forward into the new year. So I'm going to pass it off to our finance lead, solution architect here for our SAP Business by Design practice, Carol Casey, and she's gonna go ahead and lead the session. So go ahead, Carol. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Sandeep. Let me just turn on my video for a second. Hello, I'm a real person. I'm going to leave the video off because it takes up my bandwidth, but I just wanted to say hi. And so here's kind of what we can talk about today, is kind of my plan for walking through 1099s. Is first of all, I'd like to show you a decision tree that I helped develop for a client. And I don't know, for me, it really kind of focused me on how does ByDesign pick what kind of a 1099 it thinks this transaction relates to. So I think it will be helpful for you. And then we'll talk about the things that you can see on the flow chart. For one thing, is what's my requirements for my suppliers, my tax authorities, my services. Why do I have to have things set up the way I do? We'll look at a sample transaction where 1099 was assessed and to kind of solidify that. And then we'll look at some of the reports you can do to see what's in my system right now that thinks it's a 1099, and talk about how to make adjustments if something isn't right, if it got the wrong code, or if a supplier didn't get a 1099 transaction but should have. So we'll talk about those tax adjustments, and then the process to actually prepare the returns in the system so that you can have a file that you upload to the IRS and forms that you can send out. So, and what I did on the PowerPoint was I put little screenshots of, we're going to go live. We're going to go back and forth between the PowerPoint, but I've got screenshots of some of the screens we're going to look at today. So I think that will help you. So here's the decision tree. And this is based on some testing that I've done and some pretty generic SAP help documents to help you know, when is it going to say it's a 1099 reportable transaction? So the first thing is that you have to have, in the Tax Management Work Center, you have to have your tax arrangements set up. If you don't have them set up, system doesn't think you need to do 1099s, and it will not record a 1099 transaction. So that's the first thing. We'll go through that in quite a bit of detail. The next thing is your supplier master has to have, on the financial data tab, it has to have a 1099 tax rate type put in. If it doesn't think that that supplier is a 1099 supplier, and it will not assess taxes. So if you've got that set up, then now we have a transaction, an invoice entry, if you will. So the first thing is, when you put in a PO or a supplier invoice without a PO, you have a choice, as most of y'all probably know. Are you going to use a service, or are you just going to put in a GL account? So if you put in a service, and if that service says it's a 1099 service, ByDesign will use the 1099 type, non-employee comp, royalties, whatever. It'll use that type on the service to decide what box on the 1099 this transaction goes to. If you're not using a service, if you're just using a GL account, let's say, then it looks to the supplier and it sees if the supplier says what kind of 1099 income I have. Is it non-employee comp, rents, royalties, etc.? And if it has an income type, it'll use that type. If not, you can input the type. It knows it's a 1099 supplier because you said so over here, but you have an opportunity on the supplier invoice to say what box you want to use for this transaction. So that's how that works. So let's dig in and let's talk about master data. So the first thing I wanted to mention, and I'm not planning to go into that area, is that when your system was first set up, someone did a check mark to say, yes, I have withholding tax. Withholding tax is the generic word for any kind of special tax on transactions. In the US, it's 1099 transactions, but you'll see it called withholding tax all throughout the system. And then also there's some configuration activities where if you are wanting to report state 1099s as part of your filing with the IRS, you can add the states that you want to use in that process. There's an activity where you have to add individual states if you want to include them. So I won't go into that, but there are two activities both with the name withholding if you are searching in the activity list. So let's say that's all set up. The next thing is to talk about the tax authorities and the tax arrangements. And I'm going to go into the system and look at that. But one thing I wanted to mention, I've seen a lot of times happens. On that tax arrangement, you have to put in a person responsible. It's not shown as a required field, but it is for you to be able to create that 1099 file. That person responsible's name and contact information is included in the file that you upload to the IRS. And that person's personnel record must have a telephone number and an email. If it does not, you'll get to the very last step in preparing your 1099 return, and it will say that that's not there and it won't let you go forward. So let's take a look in the system. I'm in a reference system we have, and I was looking around at some stuff. Let's go to tax management. And this is our reference system, so it's used with a whole bunch of different countries, but you will probably have sales and use tax returns, and here's where your 1099 returns will reside once you create them. On periodic tasks, you know about sales and use tax returns, but here's your withholding tax return run. If you need to make adjustments to 1099s, once you do your reports and see you've got some issues, this is where you make those adjustments to transactions to say, oh, it didn't have 1099, it should have, or it had the wrong 1099 income type. And then here's reports. So, and we'll talk about those reports in a minute. But let's look at the tax arrangements that we have set up in this system. And we're going to use my US company. And here's my Department of the Treasury authority. And then here I can see my tax arrangements. And let's just get in and take a look. So our company we're going to use is Almica. It's my US company. It must have this checkbox here. That's what says, okay, I'm doing a 1099 here. And then you must put in your EIN. This is going to be on the file. It has to be correct. Then there are tax return arrangements, and let's talk about that a little bit. Those of you who've been around for a while know it used to just be 1099 miss, and even non-employee compensation was included on the 1099 miscellaneous form. But several years ago now, Congress decided to split, and the IRS decided, I guess, to split non-employee comp into a separate return, separate form. And those forms have an earlier due date than the other ones. So in ByDesign, you'll want to set up 3 tax return arrangements. This one, and you'll see here the income type, this is to create the forms that you're going to send to your suppliers. You can give it any name you want, but that's what it does. And you can see here, when you choose this tax return type, it says down below here, print form required. The next one you want to do is the ability to create the file. So you create another tax return arrangement and give it this tax return type. Notice here it says electronic submission. So that's, it knows it's going to create an electronic file for you. And then you also need to have an arrangement set up for your NEC filings. And so the tax return type is NEC. This one type includes the forms and the file. Oddly enough, but that's how it works. So you can see here it's got both of those. If you have I've never had a client that actually had to withhold money from 1099s, but if you did, you would want to make it be payment relevant. And then also, here's that person responsible field. Again, it's not flagged with a red star, but for the U.S. withholding tax returns, it is a required field, and it can be anybody. In the old days, it'd be the person signing the form, and I think I can dig into her. You can get to her and make sure she's got a phone and an email. And I think she's got to have an address as well. If not, you need to have the right person edit that before you try to file the return. Okay. So that's kind of the tax master data setup as far as ByDesign, gathering transactions and putting it in this area so that you can prepare your return. So we talked about that. Let's talk about supplier master. And see, I do have a screenshot here for you of what I'm going to show you. I have a supplier set up that we're going to use in our examples today. Her name is Roberta. I gave her this name, 1099 vendor. And then if I look on the financial data tab, on the tax data sub-tab, here's where I want to put in her identifying tax number type and her tax ID. Most of the time, if it's a person, there'll be a social security number. Some LLCs may have a different number. And then that's not enough. You have to also come down here into the withholding tax classifications area and for the United States and say that it is withholding tax type 2. Your other choice, and we're not going to talk about this today, is 1042S. So even if they're going to get an NEC form, this is the tax type. It's a withholding tax. And most, again, 99% of customers, this is what they want in the tax rate type. There is an option to say it's liable to withholding. If you do that, then when you pay that supplier, it's going to hold back 1% and put it in the tax area for you to send in to the IRS. So you want to have this here. So on my little diagram, I said you can have a tax type without income type, or you can have both. This is where you put in the type of income. What box do I want it to be going to on the form? And this has your standard IRS categories. Okay, now, and then what I would do is I would attach the form that they filled out where they gave you all this information so you have it on hand. And I wanted to mention that if you go in now and fix your suppliers, it doesn't fix the transactions that have already happened with those suppliers. So this is not, even though it has a start date, this is for future transactions with this supplier. It will use these settings, but for old transactions, it will not, and you'll need to do a tax adjustment. And that's why we're going to talk about tax adjustments. So let's look at a sample transaction with Roberta and see how it works. So this is a transaction I've already created. It's an invoice transaction with her. And on the items tab here, I can go to my taxes sub-tab. And you may not have ever noticed, but there is a withholding tax details sub-tab. And here it says that this has been flagged as non-employee compensation for her. And for the whole amount, for the amount of $1,000. If you had several lines and you just want to look at it in total, on the general tab, you can go to the taxes in the withholding tax details sub-tab, and here you would see the individual lines with a total. I wanted to show you, I kind of started a new invoice with her. And so if you've got her flagged as non-employee comp, anything you pay to her, it's going to go through that decision table, and it's going to assume that it's non-employee compensation unless you're using a service with a specific category. So I've had clients that will create a service for, like, when they're paying reimbursable travel expenses that are not income to the employee technically. So you can use a service that's set up as exempt from withholding. Or if you do it while you're in data entry, you can change this by choosing the tax code. I went too fast here. So you have an opportunity to have control before you've posted this transaction. Notice that some of them are like with withholding, without withholding. So make sure you choose one that does not have withholding indicator here. Okay. So back to the suppliers, let me just mention a couple of other things. If you're looking at your list of suppliers and you're like, and I do recommend it, and this is a good time of year to do it. If you're like, gosh, I wonder if all my suppliers are set up right for 1099s. Of course, you can look at the individual suppliers, but there is a supplier master data report you can run that would show you the details. And it's this, you can add it here, but it's supplier details with withholding tax details. And you can choose a specific status, but I can just click here and start the report. And so this is a list of all the suppliers in the system. And I've got it grouped here by what kind of withholding tax setup do they have. And so, like, here's my friend Roberta, and it shows her tax ID and that she's not withholding, and she's got a good address for me to send it to. And it's non-employee comp. It's what's shown on her supplier master record. I'm paying rents to some people that need 1099. So these two are set up for the rent category. And these ones are set up, they say withholding tax 1099 miss, but they don't have that income type filled out. And then I have a bunch that don't have anything. They may have a tax ID. So what? We haven't said to the system that we're going to pay withholding tax. So this is maybe a first step. If you know your suppliers and that they should be getting 1099s, this is a good way to make sure that the data looks correct. Okay. So back to our little PowerPoint here. There's the supplier master. And we did look at a sample transaction. And again, it's the sub tab of withholding tax details. And now let's talk about some reports you can run. What I recommend is that you run a report from the system of everything that the system has already captured as a 1099 transaction and compare that to your expectations. Especially if you just got implemented recently, it may be that you thought you had those suppliers set up for 1099, but you don't. So one of the things you can do is look back at the 1099s you issued in prior years and see what this report has and see if it looks right. So let's go look at a withholding tax items report. One comment, and even I have to remember this when I'm running this report. As you know, 1099 income is only reportable by folks if they have been paid. So ByDesign knows that, and it will only show you invoices that have been paid on this report. And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. So let's go look at a report. I'm going to go into tax management. To reports. And I've marked this one as a priority. So the two reports you want to use are this withholding tax items report. And also you can, this report's not relevant for the US. So this is the one you want to do. And you can launch it. I've already launched it here, so I'm just going to show you here. I put this in for my company 1000 for the US. I put in a range of payment dates and just hit go. It said, show me what you got. And so this is what the system has for the year. Notice it says payment date. So these are payments made in 2024 for transactions that were flagged as 1099 transactions. Here's my friend Roberta, and here's actually that invoice we were looking at for $1,000. Now, it only shows 750 here because I've got Roberta on a retainer and I held back 25%. So that's important to know. And also notice here for Roberta, I've got some things that are non-employee comp and some things that are other income. And I just did that to play around with, but I just wanted to show you that. So right now we can see that actually every supplier paid in 2024 is non-employee comp except for this category here for other income. And it shows you the invoice. It doesn't let you navigate to the invoice from here, but at least it gives you the invoice number and you can go take a look at it. So this is the invoice. I believe this is the payment ID. So this is a report you would run. It shows you all the details. This is what's going to appear on your 1099 return when you do the tax return run. So the process then to, well, first of all, let me show you. If you need to make an adjustment, you would go down here to manual tax entries and to you do not just do a normal journal entry voucher. It's not going to do it. It's not going to hit the tax subledger. So you have to do your entries here. It will create a special tax related entry. Just let this pull up. And actually I have this one as an example. This was done way back, but let's just take a look here. So you can give it a posting date. You indicate the supplier. It needs to know the supplier because it needs to go impact their name on the tax return when it's done. And then it will have, you're not recreating an invoice. You're just making an adjustment of something that was wrong and something that was right. So you want to choose an account determination group, AKA GL account here. It doesn't matter really too much what you use because if you use the same one, it's a debit and credit. You're mainly just wanting to change the tax code here. And so in this example, maybe someone got reported as 1099 and it should not be. So I want to take it out. I'm going to credit that expense. And so I'm going to take off the non-employee comp and put it in as a blank. So then it would not be included on the 1099. If there's an account that you want to use that doesn't show up, you need to go look at your account determination groups. There's, if you're interested, I can show you, but there's a column of checkboxes on the account determination groups, and it wasn't checked to be able to be used in tax entries yet. So you just need to add a checkbox if there's something you want to see here that's not here. And then you can do a check. I'll say check. And then, actually, this is an old one, but then you would release it to post the journal entry. This actually is no. Let me show you one that's been posted. So here's one. So here I wanted to, this one was, it was reported as royalties. I want to make it be other income. So I'm saying credit, royalties, debit, other income. It does create a journal entry. And so we see that here. So you see it's a debit and credit. They both went to travel expense. But it's only really, the only real purpose is that it is adjusting the 1099 category. And I'll just also mention, it's up to you, but you could make it just be the whole amount. Like if you had 10 invoices to this supplier, you could make debit credit for each invoice, or you could just do one lump sum. The IRS is just going to get the grand total. As long as you know what you did, you should be good. So that's the withholding tax base amount entries. Okay. So after you've got all that homework done, you're actually ready to prepare the returns. And so what I say is run a report first so you can double check what's shown on the tax return as what you expected. Then you want, this is like depreciation or GRIR, you got to do a run and then you can review the return. So we're going to do let's take a look at a withholding tax return run. So this is one I did last night. If I say, let's take a look. So it assigns the ID automatically. It's up to you what the description is. You choose which one of those 3 tax arrangements you're wanting to report on, and you choose the dates. I will tell you, it gave me a warning when I said December 31st, and it said it's not December 31st yet, basically, but I was just doing that as an example for you. And then you would save it, set to active, schedule it, start immediately. It then looks at all the transactions that have been paid in this year, and it produces, down here I can see the log that was successful. It had no errors. And it actually, it's kind of nice. It tells me the tax return ID that it created. So I can just navigate to that, but I can also, of course, go here. Your default view is in preparation. I think I released this one last night, so I'm going to look at reported, or you can say all tax returns. And I could just say company 1000. Okay, so notice this one says reported because I did release it last night, so I could show you a released return. This one is in preparation because I did not release it. So let's take a look at this tax return. Also, just a comment, I added these columns with Adapt to show on my screen. I think that's a really good thing to do. It's very helpful. So now we're looking at the tax return. It tells me how did I fill out my return run. It has been reported. And on the selection, it tells me more information. Then on the tax return tab, it will show you the list of suppliers and tax totals here. No one had backup withholding, so it's saying no FIT was withheld. And what's really nice is here, you can select someone and you can go to details. And it gives you the details of how did you come up with that number. And it shows you it's these 3 payments made on these dates. And here's the amount of the transaction. And here's the taxes. You know, there's no taxes assessed because we didn't do any withholding tax. And you can print this out, you can close it, whatever. And you can also navigate to that transaction if you want to see it. Notice that we've got this 22,500 on our report we did. Notice that the total for Roberta of other income, which is on the 1099 miss, was 22,500. So that's what it's reporting here. And see, there's those payment amounts. Let's see, I think I was here. I can put in notes about this that I want to make for myself. There's logs, and then on the attachments, it's not showing. It did send the forms to the manual printer, and I can go show you where that is, but I can take a look here at the forms themselves. And so here is the form for Roberta. Here's her 22,500 with no taxes withheld. And it shows my company information, my company EIN, and then this is her taxpayer identification number. And it just prints out 2 copy Bs on the same page. It doesn't print out a copy A for you. It's like, well, just use copy B. And then if you want to, depending on how you've got your print queue set up, I can go to my manual print tasks here. And this came here because it went to a default print queue. And so I can also print it out from here. So that's for the form on the 1099 miss. To create the file, it's that other tax arrangement that we looked at, and I don't remember if I did. I may not have done one last night, but I can show you. If you do the NEC run, it will create not only the forms, but also the .txt file that you would download from ByDesign and then upload it to the IRS's FIRE system. One note is that you're probably aware there's a transmitter control code. It's a TCC code. You have to have that code when you release these returns that have a file attached. You've got to have that TCC ID. So probably a good idea if you don't know what it is right now to go find it. And you can do a test upload to that Fireside if you want. So, that's the reports. We have this here. And we talked about the base entries. And then we talked about the runs. And actually that was the end of my prepared comments, but I'm happy to kind of ending sooner rather than later. I don't know if we've had any questions come in, Sandeep, or if anyone wants to
Yeah,
make any comments or questions.
yeah, it doesn't look like there were any hands up during this session. We've got one question. Celia, if you want to put the question in the chat and I can read it out to the group. Actually, I can see if you can unmute and ask your question live here. Okay, go ahead. Okay, we can't seem to hear you. Do you maybe want to put your question in the chat and then I'll read it out live to everybody?
So it looks like, well, I don't know about Celia, but someone asked, can we map any configuration or scoping level from Suresh? I'm not sure what you mean. I can show you the scoping. I can show you the activity where I mentioned that there's some places where you can like add states that you want to do the combined state and federal filing. I can, if that's what you're wanting, I can show that to you.
Yep, I don't see anything in the chat just yet, Carol. So maybe if you want to get
Okay.
into that topic for now, and then
Yeah. Okay.
we'll wait for some questions to come in the chat.
Okay. Yeah. And again, I mean, if you've already been on ByDesign, you've probably been through this. I think, you know, to me, it's more a matter of reviewing your information and your reports now. So you got plenty of time to make corrections or get your 1099 numbers from those suppliers or whatever. So, and I think, so again, we've got lots of countries scoped in here. So here, there's two activities. One is this withholding tax US. We'll look at that first and then the return. So here on this activity, and I'll say too, you know, SAP technically is in charge of keeping this updated, but I think it's a really good idea to make sure that, you know, if there was a late change in a withholding rates and you're actually doing withholding from people, that's a good place to do it. So this shows that for people who are subject to withholding, these are the rates. And it kind of says, you know, don't override it. And then here's the codes. So for example, code for non-employee compensation, it's this tax event. And it's if the transaction is set up, like Roberta is set up for 1099 miss with non-employee comp. So it's going to assign that transaction to this tax code on the return. And this is an area that's actually pretty static with the IRS. So this doesn't really get changed very often. And then on the tax return, there are settings here, are thresholds. This is where your $600 comes in. So it's set up with threshold amounts, and it tells you you can't change them. So I suppose if something got changed by the IRS and needed to be changed in ByDesign, you didn't see it changed yet, you can work with us and submit an incident and say, hey, you know, the threshold amount for non-employee comp is now 500 or whatever. So that's this. And then for your NEC returns, and usually you don't have to mess with this at all except for the state. So I wouldn't change this up too much without being really sure. But for this tax return type of non-employee comp and this income type, it's got this tax base amount. It has some subtotaling things it's going to use to prepare the return. And then on reporting states, in this system, we just have Pennsylvania and Texas set up. You can add other states. And this would indicate that, yeah, I do want to report this to those states when I'm preparing my file. Oh, I see, Celia. You're saying you're wondering about that fire. The fire site doesn't work anymore. I don't actually upload my own files, so I would need to take a look at that for you and get back. But maybe that'd be something good, Sandeep, we can look and send out with our notes about what's going on with the fire site. Or maybe someone else in the group has already taken a look at that and can help. Okay, so Celia's saying there were changes a couple of years ago. Now she has to use IRIS and the formatting is different. I'm assuming that the file will still upload. It should, because you know SAP is in charge of creating those file types. If it does not, then we would need to get an incident with SAP real soon. Because I've seen a few years ago, they didn't update their NEC forms for some changes that were made. And I submitted an incident and they were like, well, what do you mean? And I had to tell them what I meant. So it could happen. Oh, okay. So, huh. So Celia, it sounds like you've had problems uploading your file to that IRIS site. I can look around after the session and see if there's any KBAs or help docs on that. But that's good information to know because again, the file itself is created by the system automatically. I don't think that's something we can change, but we'll find out.
There's another question, Carol, from Suresh. Can we map any configuration or scoping level?
This I'm showing you right here. This is what you can map. You can't really, I mean, this is it. So as far as impacting what gets reported, that's where that diagram comes in handy. So I'm not sure, Suresh, exactly what you mean by map. The only mapping that I'm aware of is on the account determination groups. If you do have suppliers where you have to withhold money, that is an account you have to specify in the account determination to GL area. so that the system would know, where to book that tax that you've withheld from the supplier before you pay it. Other than that, these are the only two areas in the system as far as, there's one scoping question that says, do you need to have withholding tax? And so that should have been checked yes. And I probably was default checked yes by the system when it got turned on. And then when you say yes, then these activities appear here. And so if for some reason they're, my view here I did was all activities, which is ones that are turned on for this system or not. You'll see if you don't see these in your system and you want to look at them, you may need to say all activities and then add it to the project. Or you can look at it here. You can look, but you can't edit if there's something here that says no. Right. So are there any other questions besides Celia's?
That's all I can see for
Okay.
now.
Yeah.
So were there any other last minute questions before we wrap up from the audience? Just wanted to check in before we wrap up.
Okay. So we've covered how the system decides that a transaction will be a 1099 transaction. We discussed that it's only going to appear as something to be reported if it's been paid based on the year it was paid. And then we talked about the tax arrangements, and they do have to be set up pretty carefully. That person has to have a phone number and an email. You have to have 3 arrangements if you're reporting NEC as well as 1099 miss. And we looked at supplier master setup and a report where you can review and see how your suppliers are set up. Also, there is a service setup. You can designate on the service financial data tab. There's a withholding tax area that you can, force it to be like exempt from tax if you're going to be paying, say, travel expenses to a consultant and you don't want it to show on your 1099. We looked at where that withholding tax information is on a transaction. We looked at the withholding tax report and where you create the tax return runs and then the files. And we also talked about how to do the tax adjustments if someone wasn't assessed 1099 and should have, or vice versa, or they got the wrong income type of their 1099. So I'm very interested, Celia. I will take a look about the IRIS site and the SAP files and see if I can find out something for us, because you shouldn't have to do a lot of manual formatting in my mind. I don't work for SAP, so I can say that. But it's to me, it's their responsibility to give you a file that you can upload with hopefully no overrides or very few. Okay. All right. So this is Sandeep's contact information. If you think of something else that you need to know, please reach out to Sandeep, and I'm pretty sure he would reach out to me. And then Sandeep, I think that as part of just the normal webinar thing, we will send out this PowerPoint slide just as a kind of like a help document for folks. And also I think we're going to have the recording available.
Yeah, so we'll hand out the PowerPoint presentation. We'll find our filtration process out pretty soon on how we'll get the access to the recordings to everybody here. But other than that, look out for some calls from myself, and we can follow up. And we're looking forward to seeing you guys all on our future webinars as well. Until then, feel free to reach out to myself or Carol or any of our leadership members, and we'd be happy to assist you guys with any of the inquiries you may have on 1099s or anything inside the SAP Business ByDesign ecosystem. So,
Yeah.
so thank you so much, everybody, for joining today's webinar. Until next time, take care.